Hi everyone, welcome to Draw with Jan channel. In this video, I'm going to show you how to draw and color a realistic eye using color pencils. I have used Carandache luminance color pencils for this. Please feel free to use any good quality color pencils that you have, preferably a pack of at least 48 colored pencils. Let's get started. First, I'm going to draw an outline for the eye. Make sure not to draw it too dark because you don't want the pencil marks to be visible later on while coloring. Take your time and draw it slowly. I have increased the pace of this video to cover as much details as possible. I'm actually drawing slowly. Once you finish drawing the outline, you can use an eraser to make it lighter, which will help you produce a more realistic output later while coloring. I'm moving on to coloring the first layer of the eyelid, and I'm using burnt ochre 10% for this. Instead of shading it plain here, I'm trying to create some wrinkles to make it look more natural. Pay attention to the reference picture and the details while shading. If you need a realistic output, be prepared to spend the time needed for your drawing. It took me about 4 to 5 hours to complete this drawing. You need to spend a lot of time observing the reference picture very carefully, understanding the multiple layers of shading in it, and try to produce as much of details as possible in your drawing. You will notice that sometimes I'm using circular motions and sometimes I'm using hatching techniques, which is nothing but drawing a series of straight lines to shade. You will know which technique to use with experience. Practice helps provide insights into what techniques to use for producing a particular result. You will notice that I'm leaving a few areas blank. This is for the highlights. If you observe the reference picture closely, you will know where the shadows and highlights are. Now moving on to the next color, which is Anthraquinoid Pink. Again, you'll know which shades to use for your drawing with experience. You can try out different shades on a piece of paper before you actually get to your main drawing. Pay very close attention to the details here. As you can see, I actually left a few areas blank while shading for the highlights. I'm not using Anthraquinoid Pink for the entire outline, but switching back to burnt ochre 10% for a part of the outline of the lower eyelid. Now back to Anthraquinoid Pink, but I'm going to be using a combination of pink and burnt ochre 10 and blend in the colors to produce a realistic effect for the skin. Also, as I'm shading, instead of keeping it plain, I'm trying to produce some wrinkles in the skin. Like I mentioned before, I'm using a combination of various techniques to produce the desired result, and you will know this with experience. For now, you can pay attention to the techniques that I'm using, follow it closely, and complete the shading of the skin. I'm using Naples Ochre for this part of the skin. Since it's a lighter shade, it'll help in producing a bulging effect of the skin. I'm applying a little more pressure for producing a darker outline of the upper eyelid using pink. As I'm shading, I'm also trying to blend in the colors using burnt ochre 10%. Blending helps you produce a smooth effect and avoid any harsh lines in your drawing. I'm now moving on to shading the iris and the pupil. I'm using turquoise blue for the first layer of shading. Drawing the outline for the pupil here. This is the part where you need to pay very close attention to the details while shading. If you make any mistakes, it can be very hard to correct it later on. If you notice, there is a pattern in the iris. If you don't feel confident about directly using a color pencil to shade, you can always draw an outline using a pencil first and then shade. As you can notice in the reference picture, there's sort of a white curvy pattern around the pupil, and I'm trying to create this by leaving it blank and shading blue around it. Now for shading the rest of the iris, if you notice, there are a series of lines visible within the iris. The tone of the shading isn't even throughout, so pay attention to where the shades are darker and where the shades are lighter and shade accordingly. The shading is darker closer to the pupil and also closer to the ring within the iris. Make sure the outline is not a harsh line but slightly blurred. Now the pupil is going to be the easy part. We're just going to shade it plain black here, but you just need to make sure that you stay within the circle that you have drawn. Using Slate Grey for the outline here. Now using middle cobalt blue for the darker portion of blue in the iris and using light blue to blend it in. I'm now going to continue using light blue for the next layer of shading in the iris. This is mainly near the outline and the area around the ring within the iris to make it look darker. Follow the pattern in the reference picture and make sure the lines are visible while you're shading. Now switching to the next layer of shading using Slate Grey for the darker portions within the iris. Follow the same pattern and make sure the lines are visible while you're shading. I'm also going to be using light blue to blend it in as I'm shading. Also using middle cobalt blue for the darker shades. Using white to blend it all in, and going to add some finishing touches using Slate Grey and Cobalt Blue. Now adding the next layer of shading for the upper eyelid using pink. I'm going to leave this area blank for the highlight, using a bit of turquoise blue and white for the shading here. Now using burnt ochre 10% for the skin. Now using French Grey 30% for the eye makeup. I'm also going to use white to blend it in. Now using burnt ochre for the darker portions of the eyelid. I'm using this mainly for the outline, and instead of drawing harsh lines, I'm trying to blend it in to the extent possible. Now switching to burnt sienna for the inner part of the eyelid. This is burnt sienna 10% and I'm using it as the mid-tone here. Now using Slate Grey to draw the eyelashes. This is just the first layer of shading for the eyelashes, and later on I'll be using a black pen to draw the eyelashes. Pay attention to the direction of stroke since that is extremely important here. Also keep it free-flowing and draw the lines confidently to make it look realistic. Now using Anthraquinoid Pink for the darker portions in the upper eyelid and also some parts of the inner eye. Although the inner part of the eye is mostly white, if you pay close attention, you will notice the blood vessels, and I'm using pink to shade this. Now for the lower part of the eyelid, I'm using French Grey and Slate Grey for the outline, and also shading some parts of the eye. If you notice, I left a part of it white for the waterline. These minute details will really help you produce a realistic output. Using white can help you blend in all the colors really well. Instead, you could also use a blender for this. Keep working on the details until you're satisfied with the result. Now back to the eyelashes, and I'm using Slate Grey for this. As you're working on the eyelashes, make sure you get the base layer shading correct first. Eyelashes is really the final step in your drawing. I'm now using a black pen to work on the eyelashes. I've posted the details of the pen used in the description of this video. You will notice that there are some parts of the eyelashes which are lighter than the rest, so I have used grey for these. Follow the direction of the strokes. Pay attention to the length of the lashes, since these tiny details would go a long way in producing a realistic drawing. The next few minutes in this video are going to be focused on drawing the eyelashes. And while you're working on the eyelashes, remember to complete the layer beneath it to the extent possible before you work on the lashes. using burnt ochre to make the outline here more visible and darker. Now moving on to shading the skin surrounding the upper part of the eye. Using Anthraquinoid Pink for the second layer of shading. I'm also using burnt ochre for the dark portions and blending it in. Now using burnt sienna for the outline in the upper eyelid. And I'll be using burnt ochre to blend it in. Once you finish drawing the outline for the upper eyelid, it'll give you a good idea for shading the skin above the eyelid. I'm using Anthraquinoid Pink for this, and I will be using burnt ochre 10% to blend it in. I'm going to add another layer of shading to add more depth to the drawing. I'm mostly using the same colors again, burnt ochre and burnt sienna for the shading. Using sepia for the outline. Now using a black pen for the final eyelashes. Finally, I'm using a white pen for some highlights. Highlights are very important to make your drawing look realistic. Hope you enjoyed watching this video. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel for more drawing videos. Thank you and see you again soon.